Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to, I guess, the first panel in this room. We'll be talking about on-chain brands. Very excited. I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. My name is Jihad. I run Native Studio, which is like an independent consultancy for crypto startups, and I'll pass it to Six.
Hey guys, I go by Six on FarCon. I'm involved with the Hire Collective, which is sort of building kind of like a headless on-chain brand.
Hey guys, I'm Cooper, founder of Coop Records, and we're building an on-chain record label.
Hey, I'm Isaac here from Zora, Wicked Product. I'm ZAAK on FarCon.
Hey, my name is Jose, CEO and co-founder of Scene Infrastructure Company, which is a spin-off of the FWB DAO. And we're building some secret products that are better tools and better instruments for socialization.
Hell yeah. So, the term was used, on-chain brands. I think we have at least a decent understanding of what the term brand means, but when we're adding the qualifier on-chain, it takes on somewhat of a different meaning, and I think we're all using it in different ways. I'm curious, we'll start with Six. Like, how do you define an on-chain brand, and how would you differentiate it from, off-chain brands or brands of the past?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Partially because the term on-chain has changed a lot over the last, I would say, couple of years. I think I would say on-chain brands kind of probably mean that there need to be some sort of part that is physically on-chain. So some sort of smart contract or tokens involved or something like that. And not just ERC-20s, but maybe NFT native brands or things like that. So examples of things that I would consider on-chain brands are, for example, obviously Hire, even CryptoPunks is kind of an on-chain brand. And then there are more deliberate on-chain brands. Enjoy, I think Coop Records is an on-chain brand, things like that. But really it's taking advantage of the blockchain to enhance how a brand or a meme proliferates or kind of is able to sort of fulfill its goals, as opposed to something that is purely, completely off-chain or not really taking advantage of things that the blockchain has to offer.
Yeah, I'd plus one all that, and I'd also say personal brands are very different from professional brands on-chain. I think when it comes to a personal brand, just look at someone's wallet history, and that's basically all you need to see. Are they actually making transactions? Are they buying tokens? Are they minting things? And then on a professional sense, I think it's about being embedded into the culture of what it means to be an on-chain brand. So he mentioned projects like Hire and CryptoPunks. I think those are great examples, and they're very native to the space that we exist in. Where if you go down the street in Venice and you try and tell people about it, chances are they have no clue what you're talking about. But if you pull up to an event like this and you have your CryptoPunk, it's going to mean a lot. And so I think it really comes down to the cultural significance that project plays within social circles like this. And the more well-respected it is within these settings, I think the stronger of an on-chain brand it is.
Yeah, that's really solid. How I really think about it is, in the Web2 world, you've got paid media, and earned media. How I think about on-chain brands, you'd have minted media. And I think that makes a really big difference around capturing your, creative value and artistic value on-chain, making it collectible, putting it in the blockchain. I think that just really defines what an on-chain brand is to me. And then to your point, Coop, around personal brands being on-chain, it's very true. If you look at their wallet, what exactly are they collecting? What exactly are they creating on-chain? I think that's that. And then overall, it's having a really strong presence of being on the blockchain, but it doesn't mean you have to abandon the Web2 world. You can have both running in parallel. I think that's a really important note to take.
This is where I reveal myself to people who don't know me yet as the resident hater on the panel. I think the idea of an on-chain brand to me is kind of silly in the same sense that no one says that my brand is an AWS native brand or a Cloudflare native brand. We're conflating what technology we use to disseminate the ideas and the images and the language that build our brand with where we store that data. And I functionally don't think it doesn't matter. It matters now because people like to say we're early. I don't think it'll matter as we get into the future. And I think that people won't ever talk about on-chain brands if we get to a point where storing things on-chain becomes the norm.
So while I agree with that, I'd also push back a bit because in the context that we're in right now, this idea of mintability is a relatively new term and a new action that one can take. I think folks will talk a little bit later about, from a collector's perspective, why that's significant. But from a brand's perspective, Zach, we can start with you. Like, why is this idea of mintability or being able to mint particular assets relevant to a brand? Like, what value does that provide from a brand perspective?
Yeah, Dee, the co-founder of Zora, he wrote a really good article and essay about it. It's called Advantage. Why should brands mint their ad on chain? In its essence, like ads, some sort of art, right? Say Nike, they just tap into that aspirational side of yourself. Like, what if we brought that on chain? Or like when you're scrolling through Instagram, you're like, oh wait, that's a really good piece of ad. Like, what if I could mint it? Like, that's a paradigm that people are not familiar with. They're like, oh wait, the idea of collecting these things, it's not obvious to them. Just maybe they don't have exposure to the idea of minting things. Just bringing it on chain is also an engagement channel. Like, think about it as super liking some stuff. You like it, you want to build a way for you to engage with your fans and your customers. But you're taking it a step beyond just liking or reposting or tweeting about it. You're actually minting it, so you're collecting it. Engagement channel, it's actually an additional marketing revenue stream for you. It's a net new marketing stream that does not cannibalize any of your other streams of marketing revenue. So I think it's important that brands think about it very much as an expansive way of building your brand. It's not going to take away from the idea of getting, ultimately, like ads are ultimately getting people to buy things, right? But minting media on chain is an additional product, it's an additional way for you to engage with your fans. So yeah.
And then Coop, quickly I'll pass this to you because you sort of have this interaction between, Coop Records as, we'll call it a community brand, and then the individual artists that you're working with, that you're bringing on chain. How do you pitch what Zach just described to the individual artists that you're working with as the value add to doing so?
Yeah, what he said about being an additional revenue stream, I think is extremely, correct. We basically go to an artist and we say, hey, if you can send us your song and a cover art, we can take care of the rest. And they don't need to worry about needing to be super deep into crypto, having a MetaMask, bridging ETH, all these complicated topics. And to your point, it's just additive. Like, it's not like they need to be exclusively releasing the content on chain, but I think for them, it's a lot more digestible when we can kind of strip away all of the, baggage around the word NFTs, all the baggage around wanting to be in the space and being into crypto. And so the more that we can bring that media on chain, I think it just allows people to see the benefits because they're just earning money in a way that they haven't before. And if they want to lean in more and beyond Wordcast and do these other things, they can. But I think we're in a new place now where you don't have to start there. And I think for a long time, we were asking artists to start being extremely crypto native to be successful in the space. And I think the transition we're seeing now is that the content lives on chain first. And if the artist wants to lean in after the fact, they're only going to see more success to come.
That makes sense. I want to pass this to you because I think you mentioned earlier this idea of a personal brand being represented by somebody's on-chain activity, what is in their wallet, what they're doing. I think that's also true at the community or company brand level, whatever you want to call it. I'm also very frustrated oftentimes because I think we've talked for years about there's going to be value in having this activity on chain because people are going to be able to use it in X, Y, and Z ways. And in a lot of ways, that data is just there. Nobody is using it, and nobody has come up, not nobody, but people have not come up with a bunch of novel ways to use it that has been a non-incremental step forward. I'm curious, Jose, first to you, and then Six, just from a higher perspective, what are the tools that need to be built, or how should we think about the way that this data needs to be, packaged or reconstructed to actually make it valuable and make these activities that we're, engaging with on chain meaningful, both from a creator or an individual and a brand perspective?
Yeah, I think that the thing that's missing to me isn't about what is or isn't stored on chain, or whether or not the value of that data is or isn't there, because the value of that data comes from people coming up with interesting ways to use it. And I think what's interesting to me is that a lot of what we're talking about is, in my mind, we're riding a line of conflating brand with company and brand with marketing. And when I think of brand, brand has nothing to do with revenue, has nothing to do with data. It's about the world you're creating. And so what I think is missing is just like genuine, innovative thinking about what you can do with data. And perhaps what we also need to realize is that a lot of the data that we're capturing is about things that aren't necessarily translatable into things that you might do as a brand. It's like on-chain data in a lot of ways is more like what you would capture from traditional like Web 2 cookies. And so I think thinking about how you can evolve what we capture and why, and then what you do with it as an entity to create a brand world, to create a universe that people want to be a part of and exist in and like have almost their mind hijacked by, is what I think is missing from kind of this conversation.
From your perspective as somebody who's building tools in the ecosystem, is the primary missing component the type of data, right? The creativity around like the type of data that's coming on chain, or the creativity about like how we're using the existing data?
I would say it's how we're using it. And a lot of what we're building, it's sort of this like hybrid events and social platform. But what we're doing is trying to think about how we can take the data that we collect about how you interact on our platform, present it to you in a way that feels more fun and interesting, present it to the people who are going to be using that data at a community level or company level in a way that feels more refined and exciting for them to actually generate insights about who you are, and to coach a lot of the communities that expect to use our platform on like, this isn't just about like rewarding people with like one-to-one, you have like X number of points, you're gonna get X number of tokens. It's like, no, like you're trying to build a universe, we wanna help you build that universe. The data is there to facilitate our conversations about what you can do for people that makes them feel the same way that they might feel when like they get like random kind of gift from like the favorite streetwear store that they shop at, or like when they go to their favorite coffee shop and they get treated a certain way. Like so much of this to me, like being a good brand these days comes back to like hospitality and how you treat people. The data is just a layer for interpreting who it is that you should be treating certain ways.
I want to pass this to you because I know you and I have had conversations around, to Jose's point about hospitality, like how are you engaging people in the brand and making sure that like the ideas in the world that we're building are participatory while also allowing people to have an opinion and push that forward? How do you think about that with Hire and just like more broadly from an on-chain data perspective, but also like more abstractly?
Yeah, I think this is a problem we think about because I think like the ongoing, like the sort of infinite game for a project like Hire is like getting like ownership of the brand and like the tokens into like the optimal sort of hands. Optimal sort of hands meaning like people who care, people who want to be invested, people who want to contribute and build on top of it and extend it in their own sort of like vision or their own like what they're interested in. And for us, like that sort of experiment has been things like looking at who's like posting, who's making art in the Farcaster channel, for example, and like how can we engage those people. So, and I mentioned this like earlier in a different talk, but like we used, for example, Rounds, which is a product that we could kind of see, okay, who is posting, who's creating art on top of Hire, and basically based on sort of their like engagement or like the people who kind of resonated with their work, sort of like distributing tokens proportionally to them. And that's like kind of that's like an opinionated lens because, okay, we as a community believe that artists are the type of people that, or like creative people are the type that we want to sort of engage with Hire and like keep on making that work. And with Rounds, we were able to make like a super delightful experience where all people did was, post a meme or post some banger cast that people thought was great. And then, a week later, they had a frame where they could just like claim tokens from it. And that was that's like part of, I think the reason that was special is not just because they got like money, I think, but because, realistically it's probably because they got money, but also because it was like a thing that they were doing already. And it was something that was kind of natural for them. It wasn't really like, and it was kind of like farmer sort of resilient because there were like sort of some centralized like moderation things that we were doing. And so it was like, okay, people were already posting art in the channel. They didn't even post art with the intention of getting like the reward because a lot of people didn't even know that the round was going on, but we were able to give them that super delightful experience. And so that's like a relationship that we've had with those artists that we want to keep on cultivating. And part of that is, in things like redistributing the tokens. And then other part is like, okay, the different experiences that we're building on top of it. So I don't know if Bradley's in the crowd, but like we're kind of experimenting with different forms of like looking at reputation and things like that, and how can we sort of reward people who are being honest and like thoughtful contributors, not just like farmers or things like that. And so we're like constantly just trying to like figure out, okay, who are the people we want? How can we bring them into the conversation and sort of extend ownership of the meme and the brand to that?
Cool. So I think this is a good opportunity to zoom out, actually. And I'll start with Jose, and then we'll just go down the line. Who, ecosystem-wide, is doing brand right, in your opinion? And don't say the organization that you're working for. But out of curiosity, because I wanted, to your point, Jose, about like, we're conflating some of these terms, I want to have a better idea of how each of you are thinking about this from like a concrete example that maybe we could latch onto.
Yeah, I would say like I think Hire and Crash to me are kind of like, at least at a token level, like organizations or entities or teams that are doing it right, where there's like more to the thing that's being created than the like data and the mechanism that is sitting underneath like the vision for what could happen, right? I think at a more like corporate level, I think Base increasingly is doing a good job of just like creating ideas about why you would use their technology that like you can kind of latch onto even if you don't use their technology. And I think ultimately like that is the thing that I'm most excited by personally when we talk about brand, whether we're talking about crypto or not, is like, are you creating things that change people's perception of the world, that make them want to align themselves and their values with it? Like there's that meme idea of like being a 12-year-old kid and going to watch a movie and all of a sudden you make your entire personality about that movie. And like that to me is what the essence of a good brand should always be about, is the ability to kind of hijack someone's brain and go like, oh, I believe in that too now.
Ditto that. I think the point about being aspirational, that's really important. Regardless of it being a crypto brand or not, you need to somehow build aspiration into your product. I think Base is a really good example of it. They've managed to, it's in my head, it's like, oh, they're going to onboard 1 billion people into crypto. Like, it's stuck with me. And Hire, obviously, great branding. And the interesting thing about Hire is the fact that they have been able to self-organize in a way that lets people interpret the brand in their own ways. And then that ultimately feeds back straight up to like the Hire, the Hire overarching vision of it. And I think that's really powerful. The other one is actually, I think Azuki is actually a really cool brand. They've minted, obviously, the Abzuki on Zora, and then they've minted their very first episode in the anthology. They've got really interesting people behind them. They've got Demon Slayer, they've got, Your Name, like folks from those films working on that anime. And I think Azuki is a really good shout out just because they've managed to keep their brand on. They've evolved from being a 2021 NFT project to now becoming a brand that's minting their stuff on chain. So Base, Azuki, Hire, I think these are brands that I'm really bullish on. Yeah.
I'll kind of add some other answers there. I mean, I co-sign everything that was just said. I think a chain that's doing a really good job is Monad. Monad's actually been doing a really good job of building a brand. They have like a very exclusive Telegram that people really want to be in. And then Probably Nothing is a media brand I'd recommend checking out. They've been posting vlogs on Twitter, just roasting all the things that people think about NFTs and crypto, but people are really afraid to say. And so I'd say outside of like the FarCaster ecosystem that we all know, I think Monad and Probably Nothing are two I'd recommend checking out.
Yeah, so the first one is kind of niche, but there's a community that's kind of like FarCaster native called like Proxy Studio, and they are essentially like it's started with a hyper sub, which is like a subscription, and they've kind of, I think the best thing about that brand is that it is very little talk and a lot of like action and kind of leading by example. And so Proxy Studio is this like anonymous guy who joined FarCaster like post frames in February, and very quickly like just started like experimenting with every single tool that was out there, like kind of doing his own curation and commentary and that sort of thing. And he's built like a very tight-knit community, just based on like people like respect him and they like want to participate, and he involves all the people both in and out of his community in that. And so I think that's been like, it's creator-led, but it's also like action-led, which I think is really important, especially in crypto where we see a lot of people like talk about stuff, but like the actual, like there's not really much backing it, right? It's a lot of just like froth and just like kind of that sort of thing. So I think that's one example that comes to mind for me, I would say.
This is actually really interesting because I feel like each of you mentioned some sort of activity in the example. Like there's, to your point, there's action behind the brand that made you say, hey, this is a brand worth noting. I forget who said this, but there's something that stuck with me the past few months where it's like, we have an abundance of ways to create and participate, but like a poverty of ambitious visions of the future. I'm curious, like, what are the tangible actions, and let's keep this on chain, that you see people taking that are like, oh, this is a good example of participation, right? Like this is the way that we should be engaging folks as a brand that has a vision that is trying to build X, Y, and Z world. I would say, minting, but it can't just all be minting, right? So I'm just curious from y'all's perspective, like, does anybody have a perspective on that? Not all of you have to answer this, but.
I mean, I'll kind of take a quick stab at that. I think that the tipping, phenomenon that's happened in the last few months is really interesting to me. Examples like Rounds WTF is just awesome to give people tokens in ways that you might not consider. I think historically we've always valued locking liquidity and doing things that are very financially oriented, but really just any way that you can reward people for social action. That's not new, but I think that with, Farcaster and the emergence of these platforms has become a lot more common and accepted. And so I expect to see a lot more of that in the future too.
I want to use now as an example. Them making it so easy for people to submit ideas as proposals. And I think that's really triggered a really good, positive, virtuous cycle, that's what they call it. Making it so easy for people to contribute to the vision of Nouns. And a lot of them have eventually gone on to do really interesting things, like Agora, for example. Like they've helped governance, make governance so much more enjoyable on chain. And then why proposals are important as a form of participating on chain is because it really requires you to think through what you're trying to propose. Like what sort of idea, how you're going to execute and deliver that particular idea, and then people actually vote on those ideas. Like it's very vulnerable, and it's probably one of the best ways that I've seen people come into crypto. Like even if you're non-crypto native, you have animation studios who have no exposure to crypto contributing to Nouns through proposals. So I think that's a very potent way of coming on chain.
I'm really excited by things that kind of push you to do things that are not on chain, but that record that data on chain. So like the receipts project, I think is super interesting. I think that that's increasingly where I'd love to see brands emerging in crypto focus on, which is not like incentivizing or motivating people to do more things on chain, which I think has been necessary for the past few years. And I think Zora has done an amazing job of making like the idea of like, if you created a thing, mint it. If you like a thing, mint it, super powerful. And I think the next evolution of that is what can you push people to do in their day-to-day life in the real world that has some kind of component that can be captured on chain to continue to further motivate them and excite them about doing that repeatable behavior in the future.
Yeah, I would say in this kind of like high friction, but like deploying smart contracts, like actually building software. I think like crypto is kind of like this really big permissionless sort of world, and the best way to like voice your opinion is to like, I think like create what you think should exist. And obviously like media and that stuff comes into it, but also like the apps you build and like how like where you like the ideas you have, like make them real. I think so. Yeah, I was like just building tooling and software and yeah.
This is a combination of a few ideas that were just mentioned. We mentioned Nouns. My big beef with Nouns, despite the fact that I have been a pretty active Nouns community member, is nobody knows what nounishness is. Like Nouns essentially stands for nothing, right? That said, I think you can make that argument about a lot of brands, right? Like it's, the visuals are there, the community is there, but it's like this mutual understanding that is very fragile because like the brand doesn't have, again, like an ambitious vision of the future. There's no substance that's holding everything together. Now, we can push back on that, but let's just assume that that is true. I think to Six's point here, like there's lots of different media, what from writing all the way to building software that could influence a brand. what is the way in which you can build or create media that is influencing a brand while also taking, from a brand and being influenced by it? I guess a better way to like word that is like, what does the symbiotic relationship look like between like individual participation and like the collective imagination of a brand as it's being developed? Oh, you can't pass the mic on that one. I didn't know.
Thinking about.
I think it goes back to what I was just talking about, which is like what does your brand exist to proliferate? If the brand exists to proliferate itself, and that's like the primary promise, that to me is pretty hollow and empty, kind of like you're saying. That is also kind of like my beef with nouns in certain ways. I think that to use all the basic examples that we all know, like Nike is very much set up to encourage people to be athletic. There's the famous, like, if you have a body, you're an athlete line that they use. By virtue of doing that, you end up unlocking so many things. It can be personal health and wellness. It can be community with people who like doing the same athletic activity as you. Like, there's feedback loops within feedback loops within feedback loops. And that's part of what makes the brands that we all know and love and we pay attention to and spend a shit ton of our money on. I think crypto is still evolving towards a space where we can have brands that create that kind of activity, because we're still very much at a point where, for better or worse, either we're over-focused on driving people back to doing the same 10 things on chain because that's how these companies sustain, and we're not sure yet if we're going to make it as an industry. But to your point also, like, there is this kind of lack of imagination around what it is that you can do with something that is like on chain, that ultimately, again, like, there are lots of people trying to break that barrier and push past that. I don't think we're there yet. I'm excited for the future where we do have those kinds of companies. But it comes back to, like, what are you getting people to do with your on-chain brand that has nothing to do with the action that they take on-chain and everything to do with what makes their lives better and the lives of their communities better?
All right, that's inspired me. I've got an idea now. So, my take is that I'm just going to take running, for example, right? Running's become this sport over the past couple of years. And most recently, in the past 6 months, everyone is signing for a half marathon right now. But you've got interesting brands like Bandit Running that's out of Greenpoint, and they've got Satisfy. The idea of anchoring a brand around a common action is really important. I think the idea of like just proliferating a meme, that's okay, but it's just too up to interpretation. Like, it's too airy, I would say. But if you could ground it to an action that everyone could just take without necessarily directly contributing to the brand, I think that's where it's going to help in proliferating the brand. The idea of taking the action of not proliferating the brand is actually going to end up proliferating the brand. So it's like you see someone, and to me, I think it needs to be somehow physical as well. It needs to be tangible. Can I see it? Can I touch it? Can I smell it? And that is why I think, like, with, just brands in general, if brands come on chain, like, what is it exactly do you want people to see? Like, can they associate your brand with something? Like brands with LVMH and all that, you've got a bag and people see that logo, you instantly associate that with, I don't know, status and like luxury.
Really quick, like, that's also why I think a lot of the early experiments with like big brands doing things on chain fall flat on their face, because they're just like looking at the blockchain going, what can we do here, right? Like, oh, we're going to like issue an NFT for the Birkin bag we just bought. Like, who the fuck cares? No one cares about that. But I think that increasingly, like the stuff that you're talking about, which is what can you do that makes your brand exist in front of this new audience that allows them to then spread the look, the feel, the vibe, the energy of what they produce to this whole new audience and empowers them to spread it to like their audiences is the thing that's missing.
I think I was chatting with Benji, or I forget who I was chatting with earlier, but we were talking about this idea of like ideas that are good for analysis versus ideas that are good for action. Proliferation feels like one of these ideas that is very good for analyzing and diagnosing a problem and, think boying on Twitter, but is not good for action because it is the inherent outcome of doing the things that you guys are describing, right? You can't proliferate for the sake of proliferating, but it'll happen if you're doing the right things. You have y'all have anything to add there, just to that point?
I mean, I would just piggyback off of the concept and go more on-chain to say that token distribution, I think, is the best way for there to be a symbiotic relationship between an action that someone takes for that brand and them actually capturing the value of it. And I think the biggest reason why some of these crypto brands have taken off is that people actually feel a sense of ownership over it. And I know it's a very typical answer here, but I think that it's really important to emphasize this because in a lot of ways, I think teams have stopped thinking about the ways to get the tokens into the hands of their biggest contributors and the most valuable contributors. And I think beyond any of the actions we all know about, I really would just like to see more brands playing around with how do you actually give ownership to people, and then how does that ownership actually reflect the upside of the brand to the point where there's not just ETH sitting in a treasury that people have like exposure to through governance, but there's like tangible on-chain relationships between the value of the brand and then being able to capture that as someone that's creating value for that brand.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. And I think like one thing about transacting that I kind of like, especially transactions that cost money, is it's kind of like a stated versus revealed preference. Like the things you fund are really actually what you believe in, not the things that you say you believe in. And so like as an example, and kind of an alpha leak, but not really, but like, so last night, like there were some people who got higher tattoos and we were like, that's crazy. Like the fact that you're getting a higher tattoo is nuts. And so like now we're thinking like, okay, they just did that because they wanted one, but like now we're thinking like, maybe we like can give them some tokens. Why not? Like that's a super cool thing. And like they're like, obviously like they resonate with the brand, that sort of thing. And giving them some sort of economic ownership is like, yeah, it's a real revealed preference that like we think that's cool. And it's not like, we're not gonna like try to make like a tattoo farming, institution or anything, but like that's something that they did not because they thought they were gonna get tokens, but they thought it was cool. And now it's like, yeah, that's sick. Here's some like funds. And so that's like an example I think of like, I think the challenge is like with the token distribution point is really like if you're in a permissionless system with a bunch of like financially mercenary actors, you still want to make sure like that the way you're distributing economic ownership is aligned to what you want and not to what like the mercenary actors want. And so that's an ongoing challenge. But I think like things like these sort of IRL things or like creative action, stuff like that are all ways to experiment with that.
I'll just add one thing there too. I think there's something to be said for like the simplicity of these brands and the ability for them to reach a lot of people. Like people are getting higher tattoos, but if you just show someone a tattoo of an arrow, and it's not like crazy to think about, you know what I mean? And I think something that I've been trying to smooth brain a lot more, left brain a lot more, is just like the scale that these brands and these memes can reach. Because I think in a lot of ways, founders in the space, they get so niche in building for a crypto native audience, for someone that's already active on chain, that's into governance, all these things, and you're just limiting the size of that brand that it can be in the first place. So, just as a general thought there, I would say the simplicity of the brand I think is extremely important, and the capacity for it to reach as many people as possible.
Agreed. Well, appreciate y'all. Can we get a quick round of applause for the audience or for the panelists?